Hello, Ed. How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Can you hear me properly?
Yep, just fine.
Awesome, awesome. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we have a ton of questions for you. And before we start, let me just give a very brief intro of Mr. Ed Kashi, and then we'll start talking to him. So, Mr. Ed Kashi is a very renowned photojournalist, a filmmaker, a speaker, and an educator. He has been working for more than 40 years as a photographer, and he has worked with Nat Geo, New York Times, Time Magazine, and a lot more world-class publications. And just to quote him from his website, I just copied it from your website, Ed. I take on issues that stir my passion about the state of humanity and our world, and I deeply believe in the power of still images to change people's mind. I mean, that is just brilliant, and that just shows your passion and the power that photography has. So, just to take this forward, why don't you tell us about yourself and a little bit about your team, who all are working with you, and what's going on right now?
Yeah, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for inviting me
Yeah.
for this conversation. So, boy, tell you something about myself. Where, where do I begin now? uh,
Yeah.
but I'm from New York originally, and I've been photographing for about 40 years now. So I've seen quite a lot of the world. Dealt with a lot of issues, witnessed a lot of history, especially very intimate situations with people, because my work, tends to be long form and in-depth, intimate work. I focus on either geopolitical issues or social issues, particularly in the United States. And at this point, I'm actually, the majority of my work is in video, is in filmmaking, while I still do lots of photography, and then of course mentoring and teaching and lecturing. So it's a pretty robust practice, if you like, but it's all centered around what I care about, what I think is meaningful and important in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell us about your team as well.
Well, connecting with people is one of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think can you tell us about your team? I think I saw one video of your studio tour on your Instagram, but tell us more. Yeah.
So, yes, and well, it's just two people, so it's not a very big team, but it's a great team, that's for sure. Brent Bingham, who is my studio manager, but she does, given the moment we're in, she does everything from, my social media to my website to running my archives, helping me manage my relationship with Seven Photo and other external clients, and then helps me with communication, with writing, with research, and then and editing, of course, photos. And then Mike Curry, who's been with me on and off for about 12 years, and he's like part of the family. Well, they both are, and he's become in that time a master at Photoshop, color correcting our films, printing, exhibitions, and then IT. He's a brilliant IT guy too. So, I'm very blessed to have two folks who I not only love as people, but who are also super talented in many different ways. Because one thing that I learned early on is that I can't do everything. And very few of us can. And so it's very important to learn and understand what you are really good at and what you want to do as well. So then you focus your energies on those things, and then hopefully, work with collaborators and other folks to sort of complete all your needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So obviously, I think the most obvious question to start is, how are you keeping up with the lockdown? Have you been working during the period?
Yeah. So, I mean, thankfully nobody in my family has gotten ill, and knock on wood. And I've been working quite a lot. not for pay. I've just producing my own projects.
Okay.
One of them was published in the New York Times magazine, the op-ed section, about 3 weeks ago. So that was really great. And what I've done is when I got home, it was the first week of March from the field, because normally I'm on the road 8 months out of the year. And so when I got home in early March, I realized, like, that's it. There's no, I actually had a visa to Iran, which, as you can imagine, for an American is not easy to get. And we had to relinquish it because we couldn't go. So anyway, when it was very clear to me that this was the new reality, I decided to work hyper locally. So just within the state of New Jersey where I live. And then also I started to volunteer at a food kitchen in my town because I rarely have this much time at home. And what can I do to contribute? What can I do to, for me, it's just, I want to be engaged. That's what drives me, and it was amazing. And I continue to volunteer when I can at the food kitchen. But anyway, so now I'm working on a project about how the pandemic has impacted immigrants in one community in the state of New Jersey.
So this program that we are having, because is also something very similar, though we are doing it online, but we get a lot of messages from not just photographers, from artists, from camera equipment dealers, that because of this situation, a lot of people are suffering a lot. A lot of people have very low motivation. They need inspiration. The motivation has gone a lot. I mean, it's gone down a lot. So these sessions actually, as you already know, we are inviting a lot of different artists on this program, and the whole idea is actually to just keep these people a little hope, or just keep them motivated and inspired. So that when we come out of this say this pandemic situation, at least people will get to work and start to do a lot good work. But the whole idea actually is to inspire people.
Well, here's the thing that we remember is that, in a way, the pandemic has taken some of the excuses about doing work away. Okay, because I'm not going to go to Afghanistan. I'm not going to go wherever, to India, as much as I love going to India. The reality is I'm stuck at home. Well, that means that I can work on things that cost me virtually no money to produce, right? Whereas if I decide to work, like last year, I went to India, to Varanasi, to work on a project. That cost me thousands of dollars, right? But now, so what I guess I'm trying to say is, people seize this moment, take the extra time that you have, and look around you. There's always stories around you. You don't have to travel halfway around the world to do something meaningful. And in a sense, in this moment where we're locked down and we're restricted in our travels, we also need to be safe. We need to take care of ourselves, take care of our families, take care of our communities and our friends. But that means that it's this idea of shifting your gaze, right? So often we take for granted what is right around us and who is right around us. Well, this is a moment where we can have that almost like granular perspective on things. And also it's a moment to appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So what do you think would be different in the field of photojournalism when we come out of this situation? Because I think photojournalism is, I think, the only photography field or photography people who actually are working right now. So do you see any change coming out of this situation?
Well, I would imagine one impact will be that there will be many photojournalists that don't survive this period, financially, I mean, because yes, photojournalists are working, but the majority of photojournalists are probably not working.
Okay.
Unless they're taking it upon themselves to go out and be enterprising, like what I've done. So, but beyond that, I think it's a really interesting question. I can't see into the future, but I would think that that in some ways, I don't know, it could actually have a negative impact on photojournalism, in terms of either further reducing its
Yeah.
like money for it, support, but I also look, humans love stories.
Yeah.
We will always want stories.
Stories. Yeah.
So if you have great ideas and you have great stories, you'll find a home. You'll find something, something good will come from producing them. But again, as far as the impact of the pandemic on the profession of photojournalism, I'm afraid that there'll be more people lost, and more publications that will shut down.
Yeah.
Just the time we're living through. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know because uh, we have some photography magazines and publications in India who we are in constant touch with. And I was talking to this guy who is actually one of the guy who gets advertisements for these magazines. And I was talking to him, and he was telling me that there are no advertisements at all. So these magazines actually thrive on advertisements. And since there is nothing, I mean, they are actually suffering a lot.
Yeah.
And because of that, the impact actually directly goes to the writers, the photographers, and the community itself has taken a toll in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true, and it was not easy even before the pandemic. There were already dynamics that were making it difficult. But so that's why my belief is that if you sincerely want to do this kind of photography, photojournalism, or documentary reporting, you need to kind of find another. So let's say if you love doing portraits, have a great portfolio of portraits. Like there's certain kinds of photography that will always be needed.
Correct.
Right? There'll always be a market for certain kinds of photography. So, people can do wedding photography, family lifestyle, whatever it is. But I think this is a moment where you need to be really entrepreneurial, and you have to really be smart. But if you want to do real reporting, journalism, and you're not one of those like handful of elite folks who have those opportunities, all right, you've got to find another way to make your living, so you can preserve the time and the space to create story.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So the next question is, somebody asked, how do I start on the path towards photojournalism? Because it's not the first thing that comes into mind of a young photographer.
Well, I mean, if you really want to be a photojournalist, I mean, you have to be a maniac, first of all. You must be crazy. No, but if you really want to be a photojournalist, you have to figure out what is the story that you care about. What's an issue that's important to you? And in this moment, where depending on where you live, where you are based, you need to look around you. What's happening that is relevant? What's happening that could have an impact? And there's this wonderful, I just recently read this for the first time, but it's a beautiful quote: in the specific is the universal. So what I take that to mean is, if you're whatever in a village in India, or in a small town in America, or in Europe, look for the stories that might be right around you, but that would resonate in a more universal way. Okay. And take time. You have to invest in yourself. You have to invest time so that you can flesh out the stories that you're working on. All right. Now there's different forms of photojournalism, right? I do the more like almost documentary work, long term. But then there's the photojournalism of, covering events that are happening today, right? Protests, demonstrations, the pandemic, my God, and in India, there's constantly too many things happening to possibly all right. There's never so I think, in a way, this is a good moment, educational moment, if you want to be a photojournalist, on how you do it on a very basic level. And you hone your skill, and you keep on pushing. and then if it's meant to be, you'll get somewhere.
Yeah. So actually, I had one question I was going to ask you. I think it was down there somewhere. But yeah, I think this is somewhat related, so I'll ask it now. So, what are your thoughts on mobile photography and its role on journalism right now? So, because I'm asking this because you see, before the photojournalist reaches a scene or a field, before the even the news people are, they become aware of the news. There
Yeah,
are always people with the phone. Uh, Always ready, and they capture videos, they capture photos, and they instantly share that on social media.
yeah.
So what do you think about that? How do you think that mobile photography, I think it's called citizen journalism, right? Something like that. So how do you think that has changed right now, especially in the past 4 or 5 years?
Oh my gosh, well, how about in the last month since the George Floyd?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That what is clear, it's become a vital element
yeah,
of um, awareness of what's going on in the world.
yeah.
Critical element. Thank goodness that young girl in Minneapolis had the presence of mind to
To
pick up
record.
her phone and to continue to film while police officers were staring her down. I mean, to me,
Yeah,
she's a
yeah,
hero, but she's not alone. There's so many people all over throughout the world that are using their phones to be citizen journalists. My concern is the potential for manipulation.
hmm,
Whether by individual bad actors, state actors,
yeah, yeah,
nefarious actors, whatever that may be, where they might manipulate, you know, smartphone work or videos and to sort of incite violence or to divide us. But when it
yeah,
comes to pure and simple, you or I happen to be in a place, see something happening, we have the presence of mind and the reflexes to react and to record it. That
yeah.
is super important, and it's a beautiful development, actually.
Yeah, all right. And do you do mobile photography? Do you use mobile in a field when you are actually doing some journalistic work?
Yeah, and I mean, I would say over the last 8 years or so, I've had specific assignments where I was commissioned only to use my phone
Oh,
uh,
awesome.
for both stills and video work.
Okay.
And then in my personal work, I always have my phone with me, so I always have that tool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
There might be times where the image I make or the video I capture with my phone becomes an important part of the reporting and the storytelling that I'm doing.
yeah.
And I have had, but as I say, like um, in a month, I'm going to be doing a road trip across a part of America for a Danish newspaper, and they want me to shoot stills and video. Well, I'm going to do all the video with my iPhone. So
Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah,
especially if you have one of the newer versions of whatever iPhone or Android,
yeah,
Samsung, they're all excellent.
yeah,
With the models, it's really high quality work.
yeah.
I mean, there's
Especially
obviously
for,
limitations. There's limitations as a tool. It doesn't do what
yeah,
a proper video camera or a 35 mil camera does, but it's
yeah.
more than good enough to capture, brilliant images.
Yeah, yeah. I think for if you have good light, I think for video especially, I think iPhones are really really good. I mean, we use it every day almost, and
Yeah,
they are really amazing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And to add to that point, I think we are in a place where every single second of our lives right now is getting documented and getting stored somewhere. So 100 years from now, if some other somebody will try to know that on 21st of June at 9 p.m. what Ed Kashi was doing. So they'll know what they were doing, right? So I think that is a
that's
really, really good thing that we are documenting every second of our lives and uploading it to the web, and everybody has access to it. That is actually pretty awesome.
it's kind of bizarre, isn't it? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
well, because from its very beginnings, photography formed the sort of our collective memory,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
You know, you know, whether it was like images of Abraham Lincoln or Mahatma Gandhi or, you know, so many things that up until the last 10, 20 years and the digital revolution, those images meant so much in terms of our memory of things. So to think that you, as you just said, literally there's sort of a 24/7 digest of everything, it's overwhelming actually.
Yeah, it is. Awesome. So, so the next question is, usually how many days or months do you spend in a place to document a photo essay or a short film?
Oh my gosh, it can be, you know, I mean, it can be as short as 2 or 3 days, and you know, it can be weeks or months. It really just depends. It depends on if it's a commission, where then you know, the time is more defined.
Okay.
Or if I'm working on my own, where then I'm making the decision of how much time I think I need to properly. But yeah, I would say that in my generally my long-term projects I've done over periods of years, where I make a trip, I do work, then I come back, and over time develop the project. But I think, you know, time is a very critical element in doing this work well. You know, the more time you give, then the better your work will be, generally speaking.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So, do you edit on the go, or you just shoot and get back and then edit in your studio? If
So
somebody has asked it.
again, it's not, it's rare that I get it, that I'm working where I have to turn my work around immediately. It happens occasionally on assignment, obviously, but generally I'm able to work in a, you know, a more methodical way. And so generally it'd be, you know, let's say if I go out for 2 or 3 weeks to work on a project, I'll be editing every night or most nights unless I'm really tired, but just initial edits, what I call like the gross edit, you know, where I've shot hundreds of images and maybe I want to just get a sense of what I've captured, right?
Yeah.
But it's not until I get back home and I'm in my studio working with Brenda, my studio manager, to really like hone in on the critical images to form ultimately the final you know, the final edit. So it really depends. 2 weeks ago, I had to cover. I got an assignment from Vogue magazine to cover the protests in New York City with the George Floyd, after George Floyd. That was a case where that night I needed to, you know, send in images. So that's a different kind of editing where you can't be
Right.
quite as thoughtful. Well, hopefully you're thoughtful, but you know, you're in a rush.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, talking about editing and post processing. So, how much effort do you put into each photo? I mean, is it more like just cropping and uh, blurring some stuff or something like that, or it's more about the series of photos and how the story is progressing and what you want to show in the photo, something like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, um, I don't crop usually, and if I do crop, it's very like a nip and tuck. It's nothing extreme. You know, my intention is always to frame perfectly in the moment, right, in the camera. So in terms of toning or post production, you know, it's every image is treated as a sacred image. I mean that, you know, and in general, especially in a body of work or a series of images, I'm always trying to, you know, create a consistent look to the
Mhm.
work, a
Yeah.
consistent feel in the tonality, in the color balance, you know. But in terms of my toning, because of the ethics of the work I do, there's no big manipulation. It's just basic stuff, you know, lightening, darkening, little bit of clarity or little saturation, contrast, you know, the basic, what I would call sort of darkroom work, you know, but nothing extreme, never removing information, never obscuring information. Um, and there've been a couple of occasions where in a body of work I've I've intentionally done like maybe blurring out the background, but then I'm transparent about that, you know, but it's very rare that I would do that.
Okay, awesome. All right, so let's take one audience question. Somebody is asking, normally, whose choice the final photo for a report like this demonstration in New York? You or the agency?
Well, the final edit is the magazine editor, but he or she, their edit is determined on what I send in.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, I might have made, you know, let's say 3,000 frames that day in New York City, but I only sent in 60 images.
Okay. Yeah.
So, you know, because it's really important that you control, you know, we sometimes are our own worst enemies when we edit our work poorly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
editors will, for whatever reason, not always choose the best pictures. You know what I mean? And that's not against editors. I mean, we're all human. I'm just saying that, or maybe more appropriately is what I mean is that there are times where when you don't edit tight, you might regret what ends up seeing the light of day. Editing is so important. Editing is so important.
Okay, awesome. All right, so
I love it.
somebody...
My son just wished me a happy Father's Day.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So is that your son?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, what's his name? Eli.
Eli, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, hi, Eli. Okay, awesome. So you worked with Nat Geo since 1990. So what was your first assignment you did with them, and how did Nat Geo approach you?
So the first assignment I did for them was a story I proposed on the Kurds, the Kurdish people in the Middle East. And so so I proposed it. Thankfully they accepted my proposal, and that was, you know, that was at the very end of the real golden period of National Geographic, where it was a 26-week assignment.
Okay.
And I went to 8 countries, and they don't really, those assignments don't exist anymore. Yeah. So
now is it more like short-term assignments, like 2 weeks max, or something like that?
So it depends, because it depends if it's for the digital platforms, they can be anything from a day to 2 or 3 weeks, let's say. But for the magazine, you know, they'll still give you 6, 8, 10 weeks, something like that. It depends on the nature of the story and what's involved. But so there's still wonderful assignments. That's a lot of time. You can do great work. But, you know, the first 2 assignments I did for them ended up being, you know, 26, 25 weeks, which was, you know, would be unheard of now.
Yeah. Awesome.
So,
yeah. Okay. So the same person has also asked, so can you give us some advice how we can work for them, Nat Geo, I think?
man, you have to produce amazing work. It's not easy. It's not easy. You need to have great ideas. You need to be a really, really great image maker, but you need to know how to tell stories. Like, it's not enough to make a bunch of cool pictures, okay? It's not enough. You really need to understand visual narrative. You know, you need to be a journalist to some degree, if not to a very large degree. Again, it depends on the nature. Like, if you do science photography, or if you do nature photography, or if you do, you know, cultural, geopolitical work, it requires different skill sets in a way, right?
Yeah.
You know, so some photography that National Geographic does is highly technical and really specialized. Underwater photography, mountaineering, you know, drone work, right? And then, like, the kind of work I do, which is basically, you know, a person with a camera on the ground. uh, that requires tremendous human skills, right? How do you navigate going in and out of places? How do you navigate getting access, gaining the trust of people, especially if it's situations where there's civil strife or conflict, so that there are security issues on top of the cultural issues and the political issues and so forth. So to be able to work with National Geographic, it's not just about being a great image maker. All right, it requires a whole sort of like host of skills.
Awesome. Yeah. So I have a couple of questions related to some things you have just said, but let me go through some of the audience questions first. Then I'll take my own questions. Okay. So the next question is, which one was your first camera, and do you still use it?
I think the first camera I had, they don't make it anymore. I think it was a Ryko.
Okay. Must be a film camera, but do you still have it?
There's a 35 millimeter film camera, yeah. But I've been a Canon user since the late 1970s.
Oh,
I've
okay.
been a Canon user my whole life, and then Leicas, of course. There was a period of using Leicas, but more recently, I've been working with the Fuji cameras as well. They're brilliant. You know, the XT2, XT3. Fuji's really come on with wonderful equipment. But, you know, my attitude towards the equipment is, you know, that's not what makes you great. It's what's in your head, your heart, and in your soul. That's what's going to make you great. You know, it's like after a certain level of equipment, it's just a matter of what's comfortable, what you can afford, how it feels, all that.
Yeah. So on our website also, we get these questions almost every day. Like,
yeah.
I have this much budget. Which camera should I buy? Which is the best camera for this kind of photography? So what we always tell them that whichever camera you can afford, you just buy that and learn how to actually make good images and learn photography as an art and not be dependent on the camera itself. So that we always tell them whichever camera comes in your budget, just buy that.
Yeah.
And these days, we actually are promoting mobile photography a lot because we've seen on the website from the start that more than 75% of our users are now mobile photographers. And so people do ask us about mobile photography a lot as well. But yeah, generally we tell them whichever camera you can buy is good enough for you. All right. So, so you use very different mediums of storytelling, and you use very different techniques also. For example, for the Iraqi Kurdish Flipbook, you use still images. Like I saw one video also, still images in a moving format. So, how do you work on these ideas, and what kind of technique to be used for which kind of storytelling? How do you decide that?
So you know, with the Iraqi Kurdistan Flipbook and some of the other more conceptual pieces I've created, those are more just like organic. They just sort of come into my head, you know, because I'm always trying to think, how can I like break out of this 3-2 frame that I've grown up in, you know? You know, how can I try something different? How can I expand the language of still photography? So with the Flipbook, that was really in response to having done my first Nat Geo assignment with digital cameras. This was in 2005. And so it's the first time I had, you know, a folder with 26,000 images in it, right? And as I was editing, I kind of noticed this pattern of movement, right? Of jagged movement. And it was really from there that it flowed organically. Hey, that's interesting. Let's see if we can create this digital flipbook, right? More recently, you know, I've worked on ideas that last year I did something called the Enigma Room, which some of which I filmed actually in Varanasi, where I was playing with, working with Michael Curry and Brenda with coding, with computer coding. So taking my images and absolutely manipulating them, you know, in a way that I would never have done in the past for ethical reasons. But in this case, that there was no ethical issue. From the start, it was meant to be a sort of innovative, playful project. So, but when I'm working in a more like linear, documentary, journalistic way, then I'm you know, generally I'm thinking, do I want to do this in stills, or do I want to make a film? Or if I want to do both.
Hmm.
Quite often, like I might decide I want to do a film, but I want to make sure I have some stills as well. And then I'll just have, you know, those two cameras with me at all times. But it can be juggling both, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question, but that, yeah.
No, you did absolutely. And when you come up with these different ideas using different mediums, how receptive are these publications like New York Times or Time to take them and actually publish them on their platform?
Right. Well, so when I think about doing these ideas, I don't think about who's going to publish them.
Yeah,
All right. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. Create.
yeah,
Don't wait for permission. Create stuff, and then we'll see what happens. So some of the things I've done where it was just genuinely like a very sincere, simple, humble, like, oh, this would be a really interesting idea, and then I would do it, and then it would find a home, you know, in Nat Geo or Time Magazine or the New York Times, you know. But it's unusual that I'll begin one of the more let's say nonlinear ideas with a publication in mind.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think nowadays, because of Instagram and YouTube, if you develop something like this project, you already have a very large audience and a very good medium to showcase it to people. So I
Yes.
think if people are working on something, they already have a medium, and it's actually pretty great.
Well, that's the positive side of social media, is
Yeah,
that there is no gatekeeper in between
yeah,
you and the audience.
yeah,
The question is, how do you get an audience,
yeah.
right?
Doing good work, I guess. Yeah. Okay, awesome. So you have been creating photo essays on very sensitive topics. So can you tell us how important it is for a photographer to connect to his subjects?
Oh my gosh, it's critical to connect to your subjects. Otherwise, how can you possibly tell stories in a good way? You know, in a morally ethical way as well. You know, again, it depends what your intention is, right? Like some people go out into the world and they don't maybe necessarily care about the people they're photographing. To them, they're just like objects in their frames, or their subject matter to use for their own, you know, ends, right? um I would say most people don't approach things that way, you know, and certainly for me, it's about, you know, if I begin a project, it's because I genuinely care, you know. So it's, now there are limits within how much you can get to know a subject, right? Because we're moving around a lot, and you know, it's not like I can live with people. You know, I have a family, I have, you know, there's other work, you know, there's a schedule that, you know. So anyway, so it's a tricky balancing act, I'll say that. And it can mess with your mind and your heart too, because sometimes you'll go somewhere, work on something, and you'll just fall absolutely in love with the subject. I don't mean that in a romantic way. I mean, like you'll like,
Yeah,
it'll be, oh my God, these people are amazing, or this situation is incredible, or, you know, and you're thinking like, I can't believe I have to leave in a week or in a day or whatever it is, you know. But
yeah,
that's the nature of this beast, you know, that we, unless now there are photographers and filmmakers who are deeply immersive in their work, where they will go and live someplace for a year or 6 months, right? Now that's a different and an amazing way to work. If you can do that, it's an amazing way to work. So that you, so for example, there's one of the great books and projects in photojournalism is Minamata by W. Eugene Smith.
okay,
And he went to this fishing village in Japan in the 1970s called Minamata. If anyone's interested, they should look it up. And he lived there. And I think he ended up marrying I don't know if he was already married to a Japanese woman or married her subsequently, but basically they went and they lived there, and he did this incredible body of work about how there was a factory that was putting mercury into the water, and because of course in Japan most of the protein comes from seafood, that the people in this community were being severely impacted, right?
Yeah.
People were dying, you know, children were being born with birth defects. Now, he didn't go back and forth from America to Japan. He just went and lived there. I can't remember for how long, like a year or 2 years, something like that. And to me, that is one of the monumental examples of photojournalism at its great.
Do you think that kind of journalism or that kind of storytelling art is what's missing from this generation?
Yes, except for rare examples. Yes, absolutely. And someone asked to repeat his name. It's W. Eugene Smith.
Yeah.
Kind
Okay,
of.
so yeah, we will actually post it. We'll
Yeah.
in the description we'll add this name. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and I think, you know, this sort of fast-paced life we have, this sort of, you know, disposable content, and it's yeah,
The
it's
ADHD generation.
yeah, it's true. And you know, I was just speaking with someone right before I came on with you guys about how, you know, when I first discovered photography, I would sit sometimes, you know, for hours with pictures and look at the pictures and read the caption and maybe read the story and then look at the pictures again and analyze them, you know, oh, what are the people wearing, or what kind of cars, or what do the buildings look like, and or you know, what the action that it was capturing. Because then, this is like in the 60s and 70s, that was the medium we had. You know, TV had started, but
Yeah.
still photography had, like, it had a special place. Now, what's interesting about the moment we're living in today is, in some ways, still photography has the most special place it's ever had. In
True. True.
it's like the lingua franca of humanity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Doesn't
Yeah.
matter what language, what religion, what nationality, race, none of that matters. We can
No.
share images with each other and communicate with each other, right? And
Yeah.
so that's very exciting. But this idea of you know, like a deeper dive into sitting with the work, I fear we're losing that, you know? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I actually was reading some article, and the duration for which we look at a photo now is less than 2 seconds.
Wow.
And so if you say you go on Instagram and people are just like scrolling and scrolling, right? So it is less than 2 seconds, and the images for which it is more than 2 seconds are the most popular images on Instagram. So if somebody asks me how to create a good Instagram profile, I think the best advice I give them is create an image that people will look for more than 2 seconds.
That's right. Or the term I use is that it makes you thumbstruck.
Yeah, that's a nice term. Yeah. All right. Somebody has asked how he managed successful layering his photos. I think the question is, how do you compose your photos in layers?
Right. Well, okay, so so for me, I like layered imagery because as a storyteller, I like to infuse my images with in not as much information as possible, but you know, more than one piece of information, if you like. So for me, it's about it's looking at my environment, you know, foreground, middle ground, background. Just really thinking about really trying to be keenly aware of, you know, what's immediately in front of you, what's in the middle distance, and what's in the far distance. As well as what's going on diagonally, what's going on horizontally. You know, really looking at your frame, whether it's square, whether it's 3:2, whether it's 5:4, whatever format you're working in, to sort of it's an interesting one, and it takes a long time. Some people have it naturally, and for others, it's something you work very hard to develop. But for me, those are the most satisfying images. Now, having said that, simple images can be brilliant, right? So simple. It's like, think of literature, right? There are great writers who might write in very simple language, and they're maybe the most effective writer. And
Yeah.
then James Joyce, who wrote Ulysses, I don't think anyone understands what he was saying. Yet it's one of the greatest books ever written.
Yeah. True.
Or
True.
like, think of art in general, how, there's a wide spectrum of how we create work. But for me, doing layered imagery is the most satisfying.
Awesome. All right, that was a great answer. Okay, so we are actually running out of time, so I'm going to skip a few questions and get to some important ones. Okay, so taking photos as a photojournalist is not same as any other professional photography medium. So there are a lot more things than just camera and composition, right? So how do you manage content and composition when you are in a scene where action is happening all the time, and it's actually very difficult to frame, adjust the exposure and everything, and so how do you manage that in the field?
Right. So to miss a great question, and to me, this question represents the greatest what's the word I'm looking for? Challenge of doing photojournalism, in that we have to insert ourselves into situations we have no control over. The
Right.
light, the background, the dynamics of what's going on, right? Because we can't influence the scene, right?
Sure.
On top of that, sometimes there are security issues. So just our mere presence can be a danger for us.
Yeah.
So you could be juggling all of these dynamics, all of these elements. So what I hone in on is, again, it's, as a storyteller, what are the visual elements I need to capture to tell the story I want to tell? And
Yeah.
further, and this gets back to the layering question,
Yeah.
like, let's say I'm able to sort of observe, okay, there are these three different elements in front of me, and how do I create a relationship between them to either emphasize something, create more drama, maybe create beauty, maybe create a meditative quiet moment, right? It doesn't always have to be
Yeah.
crazy, right? But that's the basic approach. And I think that it's almost like, as an athlete, it's like those are the hurdles that you need to jump over to achieve great imagery. It's that beautiful mix of form and content, right? Meaning and aesthetics.
Yeah. And as I imagine, it must definitely come with experience. The more photos you take, the more subconsciously you frame and compose, and uh, the camera moves subconsciously when action is happening. I think it comes with experience. I mean, if I go in the field, yeah.
No,
Okay,
sorry.
awesome.
And I would say, what I call, what you're describing, it's muscle memory.
Yeah,
It's, again, like being an actor or doing anything that you try to be great at. You have to do it over and over and over and over again. But the other element, well, anyway, no, I think that's good. That's good.
all right. The next question, before we go into that, I wanted to talk to you about your books. So you have written a bunch of good books, I think 9 or 10 books, right? And you're coming up with more, I
Yeah,
think. 9 books, yeah. So I wanted to talk to you about, I mean, in this age, I mean, you started writing books, I think in 2000, 2002, someplace, or maybe before that. So what
well,
now?
the book was published in 1991.
Okay. So now, what do you think is the relevance of printed books on specific topics that you have done, like aging in America, or
Yeah.
more books that you have done? So what do you think is more relevant now? I mean, in terms of printed books than compared to a website or a blog or something like that?
Yeah. So what a book still does, besides being, at least as far as we know, the most permanent object you can create, right? There's a
Okay.
thingness. There's a thingness to it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
physically exists in the world as an object, right?
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
something mutable about that. There's something real about that, right? But the reality is, a successful photo book is what, 2, 3, 4,000 copies, right? which is nothing in the grand scheme of the world, right? Whereas you could have a website, or you can have an Instagram account where you reach hundreds of thousands of people, right? So, but what the value of a book, besides the sort of permanence, is that it's, first of all, it's one of the only ways that as an author, you control everything in it, right? You control everything, but also it's like a fulcrum point, you know, from when you produce a book, you get exhibitions, you get lectures, you know, you get publications, you know, it becomes like a this sort of fulcrum point that where things radiate from it. Now, and I think that is as relevant as it's ever been, as relevant as it's ever been. So I view books as one part of the whole landscape of publishing, for lack of a better term. So I'll have social media channels where I'm publishing, right? I have my website where I'm publishing. I have newspapers and magazines where I'm being published. But a book is still this very, very special thing.
Yeah, and this thing actually. I mean, I have another question related to this. I mean, for some of the more seasoned photographers, printing is something is very important. I mean, but nowadays, I mean, if you are a very serious photographer into like doing it for like 10-15 years, printing becomes very important. But now printing is actually kind of dying. So what do you think? What do you think is happening? Why are people, because printing for big, because when I see my photographs printed, I mean, that's a different kind of joy. I mean, I hang them in my house. I have gifted them to my family members. So what do you think is the difference now?
So when you say printing, you mean like making prints to hang on a
Of
wall? Okay, so again, similar to the book, having an exhibition is important because it physically brings people together in a space.
Yeah.
Right? So again, we're not talking about numbers here, right? Because even a successful photo exhibition, I mean, unless you get into like the Museum of Modern Art or the Louvre or something, you know, you're be reaching thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, right? So the number is small, but it does this critically important thing. It brings people physically together. And when you bring people together, magic happens, right? New relationships are formed, ideas are exchanged, you know, energy is created.
Yeah. So we actually, when I started,
I'm gonna have to get off in a couple of minutes, but anyway.
Okay. Yeah. So okay. Let me just ask you one very important question that I had. Okay. I think you kind of answered this, but still, how do you keep your emotions out when you are covering, let's say, a revolt or a conflict zone? When you see actually people getting hurt and you are capturing them, how do you keep your emotions out of it and actually still create good images?
I mean, I've made many photographs through tears, or through you know, gritted teeth with anger, you know. But you have to keep your composure. You have to also remain aware of your environment, and especially in highly charged situations, because you can also get hurt.
Yeah.
You know, you have to keep your wits about you. So there are times where I've been extremely emotional. I might be sobbing because of what's happened, but I'm also having to maintain awareness of who is around me, what is going on, where am I standing, am I safe? You know, also culturally, maybe it's totally inappropriate to show emotion. You know, like if I'm photographing someone's family member dying, right, and these people don't know me, and all of a sudden I'm sobbing, they might look at me and go, "What's wrong with this guy?" Right? Because their culture, they're totally inappropriate. But I would argue that in most cultures it would be appreciated. Well, because you're human, and it shows that you care. You know, so I guess my advice is always be authentic. Be authentic and be humble. It is not about me. It's not about us.
Yeah.
be authentic and humble, and 99% of the time, people will see that, they'll feel that humanity, and they'll accept you, or they'll allow you the space to be there.
All right, awesome. So let me just ask you the last two questions, which we ask almost everyone who comes for these interviews. So we all are artists here, but if you are not a photographer, which other art form would you like to take up and actually, pursue it?
Wow. Writing music?
Really?
You mean like, can I just snap my fingers and be a music, a writer,
Yeah,
a music?
Anything else like besides photographer?
I think a musician, only because it blows me away when you think about, like, well, you name it, what, the Beatles or Beethoven, or, oh my God, Ravi Shankar. Oh my God, there's so many musicians where it's like, to think that you created something that for generations, maybe hundreds of years, it will resonate with people.
Yeah.
It will alter their mood. It will remind them of the place and the moment they lived through. It will.
Absolutely.
How powerful is that, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. The musician is the answer. All right. And the last question is, what do you think about the program that we are running, the Outgoing Introvert, where we're collecting different artists on the same platform?
Well, again, I think this is brilliant, and this is why I'm here. I support initiatives like this. In a way, this is as close as we can get to that idea I was just speaking about, where we congregate
Absolutely.
in an exhibition space, right? So,
Yeah.
unfortunately, for different reasons, we can't do that right now, right?
Yeah.
But the thought that, like, this to me is an example of the brilliant use of the new technology, where we can now, I'm when I'm looking down, seeing people from all over the world are tuned in.
Yeah.
Like, how
Yeah.
beautiful is that, right? Because
Absolutely.
again, anything that helps us share in our common humanity, especially in this moment when
Yeah.
I feel, very troubling political figures and political actions taking place. It's so important that we remain connected on the human level with each other and exchange.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Ed, we actually.
Thank
Sorry,
you
your
for.
voice. Okay. So actually, we had a bunch of more questions, but because we are out of time and you have to go, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much for everyone for tuning in. This video would be there on our IGTV, and we'll upload it on YouTube as well. We'll share the link with you, Ed, if you want to share it somewhere. Please do that. And thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, Ed, for joining us. And we hope we do this again very soon with you.
Yeah. And everybody take care and be safe.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.